If you're a fan of gritty, contemporary social novels that dive into the layers of city life and the messy complications of crime and their ongoing consequences, then today's book just might be for you. Today I will be reviewing Lush Life by Richard Price. Welcome to Spencer Reads Everything. I'm your host, Spencer Duncan, and today we're taking a look at another book that was suggested to me by the NPR Pop Culture Happy Hour, which I usually really appreciate their recommendations. This one surprised me just a little bit. It was the same recommendation that came with a couple other series. One was a fantasy series, one was the Spellman Files, both of which I have enjoyed. This one was a little harder for me to really appreciate. In part because I feel like lately I've been reading a little too much of this true crime that is really focusing more on the gritty aspects and all of the ancillary aspects to trying to solve crime and not focusing so much on actually solving the crime. So there's a little more focus on the dialogue, on the vernacular. There's a lot more focus on discussing the social standing of individuals in this book. And there's even some discussion on ideas like gun ownership and just a lot of different things that are designed to not so much tell a narrative about a crime and how it was solved, not so much as it's trying to just paint a picture of Manhattan's Lower East Side, and in addition to that, tell a little crime story. So I would say that I did not love this book as much as the recommenders did, and I think that might be in part because I've just read a little too much like this lately, where it's just a little too gritty for me, and maybe I've just had a little too much. I have several neo-noir books that I've been trying to make my way through, but I've just been struggling because I just feel like I got a little too much of crime solving on my plate right now. It's not as much fun as, say, the #1 Ladies Detective Agency. I feel like I have a lot of crime that's really focusing on just the nitty-gritty, idiosyncratic language, which is probably the nicest way that I could put for a book that I think has some pretty foul language and certainly has a fair amount of racial slurs. That's something that tends to be a drawback for me, especially if it's done excessively. And that is something that I felt like was in this book. But I have talked too much about introducing the book without even giving you just a simple synopsis. Let me just say that Lush Life is set on the bustling, layered streets of Manhattan's Lower East Side, which is, of course, a place rich with history and diversity, and as the author presents it, no shortage of tension. The story starts with what seems to be a pretty straightforward crime. There were three men, Eric Cash, who is a cafe manager, Ike Marcus, who is a bartender, and then one of Marcus's friends. And on their way home after a night out, when they're suddenly confronted by two muggers, the situation escalates quickly and Marcus is left dead. And so the events feel just very sudden, and of course there's plenty of detail, and it's actually based on a similar incident of the murder of an actress named Nicole Dufresne that happened like 20 years or so ago. I don't remember this happening, but that was clearly an inspiration for this. And that is one of the things not only that the novel is based off of, but I think one of the things that really caused the purpose of this novel in trying to depict an interesting life and trying to give a description of an area and place that has a lot of character to it. And I think that the author felt like that crime was a prime example of it. And I think that's why he focused in on that story being, the central point and the central inspiration for the crime that is at the heart of this story. After the crime happens, the novel expands into a web of complex character studies and a lot of different issues, social issues. The NYPD detective, whose name is Maddie Clark, becomes really involved, and it not just in finding answers about the crime, but in just navigating the emotions of Ike's grieving father, whose name is Billy, who, his behavior starts to spiral. And then there's, of course, Eric Cash, who quickly becomes the primary suspect. And so a great deal of the book is trying to get him to confess, and his own resistance, and just this back and forth, and a lot about the cat and mouse games that get played when it comes to interrogations. As a matter of fact, his ability to endure the intense police questioning is one of the things that makes them suspicious of him, which is such an absurd concept, but that's a video for another day about police interrogations. I'm no expert on that, so I will leave that for a different video. But what is also happening is this simple police interrogation, it's adding even more trauma something that was highly traumatic in the first place. And so that is what's going to make this, again, a discussion of much more than just a single crime, but all the things that are happening and all the other emotional impacts of that. It just really forces him to question his sense of self and stability when he did not commit a crime, yet here he is, and he is being, not only did he have to experience the crime, but he is now being questioned, and his whole life is being threatened from it. And you can see how all that is becoming a big issue. The book will continue to play out where piece by piece, more and more information will come out that will actually start to support what Cash has been saying this whole time, but at the same time, you have the detective just going through so much, like going through people's lives, trying to not just figure out what happened, but at times definitely a sense of like trying to force a certain narrative, which is part of the problem, not just because you don't want to pick up the wrong guy and accuse the wrong guy, but because even with a clear criminal act, such as the murder, there isn't always a simple narrative. And that doesn't mean the individual is justified in what they did, but for us to understand motives, for us to understand why things happen, we make ourselves believe it in a simple narrative format. And the detective is really struggling with that not exactly matching up. And that's going to be a big part of the book. And that also ties back into the broader concept of this book of trying to create a particular look at this area of New York as you're trying to not just tell a crime story, but to help characterize a particular area. For that reason, a lot of people think that the plot is impressive, but in some ways it's kind of secondary. It's not the most engaging part of everything that's going on. It's going to be stuff like the dialogue. It's going to be the emotional explorations. It's going to be the concerns over authority and the misrepresentation of truth, or simply the interrogation tactics that are a big problem. So all of that is going to be part of what made this a compelling book, especially not just for solving a crime, but considering how people, police, victims, witnesses, how all of them are interacting on a story like this. This book got a good deal of positive reviews when it first came out. I think I agree with most of what I read. The one big thing that I would say, that I actually think I saw this in some of the reviews, but I will say that because there's such a focus on trying to characterize an area and not so much a focus on the ingenious of solving this crime, I think it can quickly become more a series of short stories and at times kind of seem more like a bunch of broken up scenes. That was something that I felt, and I think I saw it in some other reviews as well, that I do think could make it a little harder to follow. It's definitely not a straightforward narrative. You certainly will have a lot of random point of views that suddenly change, and you're a little confused of what could be happening. And I think the purpose of those, we're trying to get a little more definition to a certain area and not so much actually tell the story of the crime. Those are my thoughts on it. So who would I say this book is for? Well, if you love stories that just capture that raw and often messy realities of city life, especially as it comes to dealing with a crime and all the different things that are going to be involved in that, then Lush Life is probably something that you would enjoy. I mean, it's a great pick for readers who appreciate nuanced and character-driven narratives with rich social commentary. I think that fans of crime fiction that go beyond the surface will really enjoy the author's detailed look at how one tragic event ripples throughout the lives of everyone involved. Again, not just the person that was murdered, but the people that witnessed it, the people that were there with him as his friends, the person that committed the crime. I mean, all of that. It's just this rippling out effect that it's trying to explore. You will enjoy this book if that is something about the consequences of crime that interests you. Of course, it also has what would be characterized as realistic dialogue and just a real gritty slice of life portrayal of New York City that could intrigue you. All that, I think, would make it a book for someone to admire and to enjoy if that is something that you are into. So who would I not say this is for? Well, it's not going to be for all people. If any type of true crime or any particularly violent type of book does not appeal to you, this won't be it for you. Because not only is this in there, it becomes a much more centralized part of the book than I think you would necessarily find in most other types of crime-solving books. I would also say that the writing kind of leans towards this realism, which means that the story doesn't really have a clear moral takeaway. I mean, it doesn't have like a simple conclusion. It does have an interesting wrap-up, which I found I found like the final few paragraphs to have a real appeal to again, trying to set this scene, but it doesn't necessarily have this like cathartic moment of drawing away some important moral or someone getting some kind of great revenge or anything like that. So those are the types of things that could turn somebody off that thinks that they're a fan of crime fiction Or if you're tired of reading books that are supposedly really good with vernacular and gritty dialogue that just is an excuse to have excess swearing, racial slurs, and just over-the-top presentation of people's characters, you might also be discouraged from reading this book if those are things that you've just maybe had a little too much of, like myself, lately for one reason or another. Seems to be a popular element of writing in the books that I've been reading lately, but that could just be me. Regardless, I would certainly like to hear what you guys have to say about this book. Please let me know in the comments your thoughts on this book, and maybe a few thoughts on these books that are supposed to be representing true crime, and what makes them great, what you think some pitfalls might be, or just anything that you think is worth adding when it comes to this type of novel. Of course, let me know in the comments, but don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on those notifications, and until next time, keep those pages turning.